This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Like they told Luke Skywalker in the Death Star Trench, stay on target. I'll explain next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Ron Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's edition of Michigan Podcast. And I'm getting questions. Steve, what about this scenario in the college football playoff? Or what do you think about this? Or, what happens if Georgia beats Alabama and, the Alabama bias comes in? I don't know that it's an Alabama bias. They've been the dominant program in college football for decades, so I think they've kind of earned it, but I get it. What about, if Michigan's got a loss and Notre Dame loses the game, there's one spot left, what if my aunt had testes? Would she be my uncle? Well, that part is a definite yes. But all the other stuff, okay, to quote the great prophet Flavor Flav, don't believe the hype. In fact, given where the hype is coming from, let me quote Flavor Flav a second time. Can't trust it, okay? The whole thing about whether 9 SEC teams get into the 4-team college football playoff this year or just 7. All of this is driven by essentially media folks that either are aligned with or make a living covering a Southeastern Conference-based audience. And it's really irrelevant. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think there's any chance whatsoever that if Alabama were to lose to Georgia and they're sitting there at one loss, they would bypass Michigan. What it means is it's an irrelevant argument. Now, I love to argue. It's one of the things I do for a living. But I prefer that we argue about things that are actually happening and not things that may never happen. All right, life is too short. As I get older, I want to argue less, or I want to argue about less things. But the things I do want to argue about, I want to argue about them a little ornery. Maybe that's how it changes when you start getting older. But the reality is we're having a great football season, And there's all this noise, like Luke Skywalker in the Death Star Trench, right? You got the gun turrets over here. You got TIE fighters behind you, voices in your ear, and you got Ben Kenobi, pricking your conscience from the afterlife. All this stuff is going on, and he's got one mission. And that one mission is, I have to hit the thermal exhaust port. And so with all the other noise and all the distractions, one voice comes through in the Death Star Trench and says these words to Luke, stay on target. That would be my advice to all of you. We're having, this is a hell of a fun football season. The team is fun to watch. It's got personalities that are easy to like. easy to rally behind. We actually have a quarterback. Ornery Jimmy is back calling timeouts to take, instant replay, to take catches off the board, to preserve shutouts, right? I mean, it's like what we're watching this year is a massive market correction. The breaks that went against us in past years seemingly are going for us now, like the deflected passes we caught against Michigan State, for example. Okay. Everything else that went against us now seems to be lining up in the tide. We have come now, as Gandalf once said, to the turning of the tide. We're coming back. This is now the program we have been waiting for, and it's established. And if you look at even some guys who may or may not go pro, and we'll talk about that with Michael Spath of WTKA and Wolverine Digest a little bit later on in this episode. But even with some early departures, this team's still going to be pretty loaded next year. It's bringing in a recruiting class that might have not one, not two, but three. And depending on what Zach Charbonnet's ultimate recruiting ranking is, 4 5-star prospects. I would imagine that's never happened before at Michigan, except maybe that 1998 class that had David Terrell and Drew Henson and Marquise Walker that was coming off that national championship season. But recruiting rankings weren't quite back then what they are now. And that's 20 years ago. So this is a lot of fun. We have vanquished a rival. We have silenced James Franklin and put him back to the kiddie table where he belongs. We next have Ohio State on deck. We're playing for our first Big Ten championship in 15 years. It's a fun team to watch. They represent the program, the tradition, the university well. The most quotable athlete in college football, is wearing the winged helmet in Chase Winovich. As the great prophet Aaron Rodgers said, I'm quoting a lot of prophets today. As the great prophet Aaron Rodgers once said, relax, okay? Not, all this other noise, most of it, frankly, is coming from people who for the last 8 months told us Jim Harbaugh sucked, yet he was wanted by every NFL team. I've never really figured out, how does that work? So our coach sucks, but billion-dollar franchises who fire coaches in the middle of a season frequently at the highest level, want him to coach their team, but our coach sucks. Those things, how do they both work? Or Shay Patterson was going to be the backup quarterback at Ole Miss. Well, hot damn there. I mean, Ole Miss must just be son of a biscuit. That's got to be one hell of a football team. If Shay Patterson, with just 17-3 touchdown interception ratio, is your backup. Well, no, they're a 500 football team. Oh, so yeah, again, this is driven by people who are playing to their audiences. Now, some of these are people I really like. I think Paul Feinbaum has a great show. Great show. I think Barrett Sallee at CBS Sports is a great college football reporter. I listen to him on SiriusXM all the time. And I like a lot of what Clay Travis does as well. But here's the thing. They're playing to their own specific audiences. I do the same here. My audience, we're Michigan Podcast. What does that mean? Who do we think is our primary audience? Michigan Podcast. You, Michigan fans. Now, we get notes all the time from fans of other programs that like what we do and think we take the best approach we can to covering college football from a Michigan perspective as balanced as we can. And we do, and we appreciate that. And a lot of that is I don't like to be scammed. I don't like to be lied to, even by people wearing my jersey. I don't like it, So I'd rather just be told what the truth is and deal with it from there. But ultimately, our number one goal is to reach as many Michigan fans with this as we possibly can. Our base audience, Michigan fans, hence Michigan Podcast. Similarly, if you're live every day for 4 hours on the SEC network, is your audience predominantly people who enjoy Jim Harbaugh taking kids out of your region, like Aubrey Solomon, or listeners who don't? Well, probably the listeners who don't. So you're going to, as Ben Kenobi once appropriately put it, tell the truth from a certain point of view. All right. So understand there's a built-in bias here. And no, bias doesn't mean they're critical of our team. We live in a media culture today. I see this in my day job all the time. Somebody reports something you don't like. It must be fake news. There is a ton of fake news out there, but it's not fake news because you don't want it to be news. It just may be news. You just may suck at life and not be an adult. All right. So there's plenty of things that aren't actually news that are not convenient to believe. It doesn't make them any less true. That whole facts don't care about your feelings thing that Joel Klatt was talking about the other day on Fox Sports. All right, what I mean by that is when someone is consistently good at reporting or analyzing something, but then they're consistently wrong at something else, there's one possibility, or two possibilities. One is they have a blind spot over here. That's possible. We're human. We all have them. The other is there's a bias over here, and that is the cause of the blind spot. And so when I follow what Barrett Sallee and some of these other people's analysis is that we've mentioned earlier in the program already, they're great. And yet they seem to consistently always be wrong whenever this team comes up. So that just goes to tell you there's a bias there. And, hey, nothing wrong with that. We're human. We all have our biases. I have mine too. Okay. Just admit them. Let's be adults here. Let's not pee on each other and say that it's raining. Just admit you're not a Jim Harbaugh fan, not a Michigan fan. You think he's overrated, and you ought to, folks ought to probably just factor that into your analysis. And you know what? We'll take that into account. Thank you for your honesty and move on. But until they do that, no, I don't think you should get your tighty-whities in a bind, because the same people that told you our coach was going to be fired, and yet everybody in the NFL wanted to hire him at the exact same time. And we were going to go 7-5 this year. I think that was Barrett Sallee's official prediction. Michigan was going to go 7-5. All those exact same people are now the people claiming we're going to win out and be left out. Here's the thing. Let's focus first on that whole win out part of the equation. Wanted to take a couple of seconds here on Michigan Podcast and say thank you. We are approaching 100 supporters on our Patreon page that has seen some good, steady growth this football season. And that really helps us to have the resources we need to produce this episode for you each and every week here on YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, etc. And so many of you that are watching us right now are kind to put in the $5 a month that we ask you for if you like what we do here. And we just wanted to take a moment and say thank you and remind you that if you're not yet a Patreon supporter of Michigan Podcast, here's just a look as Aaron scrolls up and down the page. These are all content items that we give exclusively to our supporters. And we do this, that's the stuff we do during the year. By the way, my college football picks this year against the spread are well over 20 games over 500 against the number this year. And then we do a lot of neat little features in the off season. We'll keep this up during basketball as well. One of our best viewers sent me a note the other day, said, man, I'm hearing from so many people that want to make sure you guys are to keep doing this during basketball season. We did last year. We're going to do that this year too. So we just wanted to say thank you to all of you supporting us at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. And if you wish to support us as well, we want to say thank you in advance and go blue. All right, back here on Michigan Podcast, and we are joined by our good friend Michael Spath from WTK at Ann Arbor and Wolverine Digest as well. Good to see you, Michael. How are you?
I'm good, Steve. I really like your background this week. It's a little bit different than it's been in the past, but it looks like it's sunny and bright and beautiful there at Michigan Stadium, which it's not here in Ann Arbor today.
Yeah, we turned the lights on. That helped. We decided to turn some lights on around here. Hey, you're on location. We got some background music. I like that. What is that?
It's some Moroccan music, I think. I'm at an Italian restaurant. Our friend Silvio's, who have been great friends of Inside the Huddle. I have a meeting here, and they've just been providing me with some libations and some food, so I can't really complain too much.
No, you can't. And as an Italian kid myself, can't go wrong with any of that, no doubt about it. All right, let's get to it.
Lasagna and ravioli today, man. That's what I'm having.
Ravioli?
So.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Now, for me, it's I like it all. But it's the simple little things. I
wouldn't have guessed looking at you.
It's the simple little things, the fresh bread. Hey, I got my bench presses in today, so step off me. It's the fresh bread in the olive oil with the fresh Parmesan, just the little things even that you gotta love, right? All right, so
I'm a big fan of that. So okay, we'll stop talking about food.
Yeah, let's talk because I'm gonna get hungry. All right, so let's go. Let's start with some basketball. John Beilein getting his 800th career win, and the university put out a really cool video honoring him with some of the biggest names in the history of Michigan basketball. We shared that on our Michigan Podcast Twitter feed this week, and is it his legacy here and what he has accomplished at Michigan, and I think about 1/4 or so of those wins he's gotten here in Ann Arbor. So just your thoughts on John Beilein, that achievement, the program he's built at Michigan as they get ready to take on really their first marquee game of the season against defending national champion Villanova on Wednesday night.
Yeah, when I look at John Beilein's legacy at the University of Michigan, I think beyond basketball. I mean, I think you can make the case that he's one of the best coaches in the history of Michigan athletics, transcending swimming and diving, baseball, field hockey, football. I mean, you go through the list. and he ranks up there. I think he is the best basketball coach in Michigan basketball history, and I would even say that if you look around the Big Ten and start to go through and rank the best from each school, I would probably put him in my top 20 all time among Big Ten coaches. And we were talking about it on our show on Tuesday, just that John Beilein has earned the proverbial benefit of the doubt, not just for this season but for his entire career. I mean, the guy has taken a program that was on its deathbed for 10 years, and kind of interesting that we just had Chris Webber in town to be an honorary captain at the Michigan-Penn State game, and all the fallout from the post-Fab Five and the second Fab Five with Maurice Taylor and Willie Mitchell and that whole group. And I didn't think that basketball was ever going to be a major factor at Michigan ever again, and he's turned it into not just a top 20 program, but consistently a top 10 program, and it's incredibly impressive. I mean, this is the guy that just gets the most out of his team year after year after year. There are very few coaches in any sport that you look at the end of the season, you say, did this guy maximize the potential of his players and of his team? And I would think if you go back and look at John Beilein's career at Michigan, and you looked at, I think he's been here for 12 years now, I would think you would say that probably after 9, 10, 11, maybe even all 12, with the exception of a couple of years where they had some injuries. But even in those years when they were down Karis LeVert, when they were down Spike Albrecht, he still found a way to get the most out of the guys that were there. And so this is a really special coach that we are incredibly lucky to have as Michigan program and as Michigan fans.
How prepared do you think the Wolverines are for the game at Villanova Wednesday night? Wildcats, by the way, really only return 2 players that were, major contributors on their national championship team. Bring in, like Michigan, a pretty highly regarded recruiting class. They've got a 5-star freshman point guard. They're kind of trying to turn into the new Jalen Brunson for them. But it looks like, Michigan is still, the defensive identity looked like it was there the first 2 games. Offensively, it looks like they're kind of trying to find their way a little bit. I think most fans are probably surprised. We're only going about 7 deep in the bench right now, but I would caution everybody to not make drastic judgments off November. You go back just a year ago, Michigan goes out to Maui, loses a bad game that they had control of at the end of LSU. They come back to the mainland and just get absolutely dominated by North Carolina. And, guys like, if I'd have told you at this point last year, Xavier Simpson was essentially going to be the team leader for the Michigan Wolverines, you would have that'd have been your reaction. He was riding the pine well behind Eli Brooks at that moment. So I suspect by the time we get to Big Ten play, the Brandon Johns of the world are going to play important roles for this team. But how ready do you think they are for Wednesday?
I think defensively, and you mentioned, the metrics are still there, and I think when you look at between John Teske and how well he's playing near the glass, or near the rim, and Xavier Simpson and Charles Matthews, these are guys that have had great success in the past locking players up. So I think defensively they'll be there. I don't expect Villanova to score 75, 80 points. I think Villanova will probably score in the 60s. The problem is that the 3-point shooting has just been atrocious so far. And I don't expect Jordan Poole to have another over game like he did over the weekend. But Charles Matthews and Xavier Simpson are not good 3-point shooters. You can't really rely on John Teske to step out there and be a guy that hits you 2 or 3 3-pointers a game. Jordan Poole's got to step up his game immediately. Iggy Brosdikis, who you're showing on the screen right there, he's got to step up his game a little bit more. You need Isaiah Livers. You essentially need Jordan Poole and Isaiah Livers and Eli Brooks. Those are the 3 guys that are sophomores this year that are all getting meaningful minutes, and those are part of the 7-man rotation. You need those 3 guys to probably have their best game, not only of this year, but really going back to, Jordan Poole had a great shot, but if you look at the consistency of how many minutes he was logging, this needs to be the best game of those 3 sophomores and maybe in their entire careers. That's really the only chance I think Michigan has to win this game, because they need more production from the 3-point line, more production from inside the 3-point line, just more consistency from those 3 guys. I really look at this season, and I think you're going to get what you're going to get out of Xavier Simpson and Charles Matthews and John Teske. When I look at it, it's those 3 sophomores, Isaiah Livers, Jordan Poole, and Eli Brooks, that I think are going to make the difference of how high this team can rise this season.
All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk some football. Yeah, I don't know what you can take out of beating Rutgers. They're terrible. They're one of the worst Power 5 teams in the last decade or so. So the number one goal was to get out of that game without any major injuries. Listening to Coach Harbaugh's update at his weekly press conference on Monday, it appears for the most part the Wolverines did that. So this game against Indiana this week, and the Hoosiers have played us pretty tough the last few years, including the last couple of years against Jim Harbaugh. And you had the double overtime or triple overtime game there in 2015. You had the snowstorm game in 2016 where De'Veon Smith essentially carried Michigan to victory with Wilton Spade out. You had last year's overtime game in Bloomington as well. What do you expect to see from this year's Hoosiers, who come in still looking for bowl eligibility by eking out that win against Maryland last week?
These guys are really pesky son of a bitches, aren't they? I mean, they just don't seem. It's like that. They're like that mosquito at the party that somehow gets inside the house, and you're just spending all the time like constantly swatting away, and eventually you smack it and you kill it. But for 2 hours or 2.5 hours, it just drives you up a wall. And thankfully, if you look at it, I mean, I saw this get tweeted out earlier by Drew Hallett and said that if you're 50 years old, that you've only seen Indiana beat Michigan once in your entire lifetime, and which is incredible. The other thing is, if you're 50 years old and you're an Indiana fan, you've only seen Indiana. We've never seen Indiana win 9 games in a season. So this is the definition of a middling program that just kind of puts a scare in everybody, but can never put themselves over the top. I would worry about this game. I think one of the reasons, honestly, that Indiana's always given Michigan some fits and some other teams some fits is I think it's always a trap game for programs like Ohio State and Michigan State and Penn State, because it's one of those teams that's easy to overlook, and they have enough weapons at quarterback and certainly the running backs the last couple of years, and some good guys at wide receiver that they can put up some points on you, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a game where your defense is getting beat up a little bit and your offense has got to outscore them, and that's what Michigan's been able to do the last couple of years. But the one thing about that I would say is the way that it falls before Ohio State, like maybe if you look at the schedule originally and say like, okay, this could be a trap game, it's for the Buckeyes, but I think the fact that it's coming off of Rutgers, I think Rutgers was now I say trap game, but understand when I'm not actually talking about Rutgers had a chance to win.
Yeah,
but that's the natural letdown game, and we did see Michigan have a little bit of a letdown, especially on the defensive end. But it's not a trap game because you can't lose to Rutgers. You just can't. If the roles were reversed and Indiana was last weekend and Rutgers was this weekend, I would have been seriously concerned coming off that big 3 stretch where Michigan beat Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Penn State.
Yep.
But because they got it out of the way with Rutgers, and because I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, do you think we'll see, what do you expect this weekend? I said, well, look, when Don Brown, before that Penn State game, talked a lot about how pissed off he was because his defense got shredded by the Nittany Lions a year ago. And what did we see? We saw him come out and have, maybe Michigan's most impressive performance defensively all year against the Nittany Lions. Well, if you're Don Brown, you're this Michigan defense, you just gave up an 80-yard run to Rutgers, the worst defensive play by 30 yards this season. So this defense is going to be pissed off. They gave up 193 yards rushing. So I think that's a perfect place for this Michigan defense to be in, because they're going to be locked in for this game against Indiana to shut down Peyton Ramsey and these guys and get out of here with a big victory. And then the offense is a little bit different. I was talking to my friend and I said, look, when you want a defense pissed off, you don't want an offense pissed off, because that gets in the way of some of that mental acuity you need to have to make some execution. But this offense right now is playing confident with its passing game. Showing that on film against Rutgers, Indiana's going to have to play, maybe a little bit differently. Maybe they play 8 guys in the box and say, hey, beat us again, just like Rutgers did. And if they do, then Shay Patterson can take advantage. But I look at this one as, I honestly think this is going to be a comfortable win, and in some ways it's going to be more comfortable than last week's game against Rutgers. I just think Michigan will look better from start to finish than they did a week ago. I think last week they really needed to, middle of that second quarter to turn it on. I think this week they'll be locked in from the very beginning.
You also have to consider that if you're a senior or a junior on this team, all you know against Indiana is near-death experiences, because they have pushed Michigan to the brink every year that you've played them. They should have Michigan's attention because they have, as you put it, given Michigan fits. So here's a fun question. Other than the seniors like Chase Winovich, who are the guys you think we're going to see come out of that tunnel and touch the banner for the last times in their careers? We know Rashawn Gary, obviously, is an obvious one, right? All right, so I'm going to give you a name. You tell me buy, sell, or hold. Buy, they're leaving, or buy, they're staying. Sell, they're leaving. Hold, you're not sure yet. Okay. You ready to go?
Yep.
All right. David Long.
I'm probably selling. I think David Long is having such an impressive football season, and you look at the numbers that Pro Football Focus puts up every week, where he's leading the country in, yards per, I think, thrown at him, and the completion percentage thrown at him is minuscule. The pass efficiency rating is almost non-existent. He's got prototypical size. I mean, Lavert Hill's a little bit shorter. Lavert Hill, I think they list him at 5'11", but if you stand next to him, he's closer to 5'9", 5'10". David Long is closer to a legit 6 feet. He's got great speed. We saw him take off after the running back for Rutgers last week. I think David Long, if he's being honest with himself and he looks at it and says, I'm probably a second-round pick right now, and you go to a combine and you really surprise some people, you could move up a little bit. But I think David Long is a sell that he's probably, if I was him, I'd probably go after this year, the way he's playing.
Lavert Hill, sounds like you're buying that he's coming back.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's not a prototypical NFL corner, and he's been really, really good. He started off the season, the first 4 or 5 games, he was not quite the Lavert Hill show, and Brandon Watson was stealing all of his thunder, and rightfully so, with all of his success. But I think that Lavert Hill has been very good these last 5 or 6 games, and I think he's probably a hold. He could go. But again, just because he doesn't have great size, I think it makes sense for him to come back as a senior and really kind of be, try to be a Jordan Lewis type senior season where he just absolutely dominates everybody he goes up against, and maybe gets some of those interceptions that Brandon Watson's gotten this year.
Shay Patterson.
I think he is a buy. I don't see a scenario where Shay Patterson makes a great decision to go pro. I mean, when you look at it, he's putting up some decent numbers, but I was reading a mock draft today that had 4 quarterbacks going in the first round, no mention whatsoever of Shay Patterson. I don't think if you're a quarterback, the way that money is structured in the NFL, it's structured to really reward quarterbacks in the first round, to some degree in the second round, but really so in the first round. So unless you're a first round quarterback, I don't think you go pro early, because it's just too much of a financial risk. And so I think he comes back and really puts together a great season, and then can be talked about as a second rounder with maybe even squeezing up into the first round. But I just don't see him a first rounder right now.
Devin Bush is like Rashawn Gary, foregone conclusion.
Yeah, I'm probably selling on Devin Bush. I mean, I think it just makes a lot of sense. Now, the one thing I will say is that obviously with his dad on the staff at Michigan, he could want to stick around for 1 more year. But I always look at these guys like, what's there left to accomplish? Devin Bush is going to be an All-American this year. If he's not, then the voters aren't paying attention. He's probably been consistently the best Michigan defensive player all year long. He can go sideline. I mean, he's exactly what NFL teams want, a guy that can go sideline to sideline, a guy that can run down, chase down running backs, a guy that can cover just about anybody. He can hit the quarterback. He honestly, if he goes pro, I'd be shocked if he doesn't go in the first round, because he is exactly what the NFL needs right now.
All right, 2 more. Ben Bredeson.
I don't think Ben Bredeson goes. I mean, I haven't heard much buzz about the offensive line, and honestly, talking to some people inside Sean McClure Hall, I mean, the feeling is kind of that Joan Bush-Abedi and then maybe Michael Onwenu have been the 2 best, most consistent players for the offensive line. Bredeson's maybe 3rd, maybe 2nd. But yeah, I just don't think that there's been a lot of buzz for him. And the fact that he's a 3rd-year junior as opposed to a 4th-year junior, I think he could come back, get his degree, finish up in 4 seasons, and save himself. It's not like he's going to be a 23-year-old coming out of Michigan. I think he turns 21 this year, so he still have some time. So I would expect Bredeson to be back.
Finally, Zach Gentry.
That's a tough one. I mean, the size, the athleticism. I mean, you put him at a combine and watch the numbers that he puts up, and someone's going to go like, wow, this guy's a second-round talent, and we're going to grab him. But, I'd probably hold on that one. I mean, I think he still has, maybe because of the fact that he just moved to tight end a year and a half ago, and he could still learn a lot about the position, and could be a guy that, really benefits from a 5th year, and could, if you're talking about, well, he's got all those receivers coming back, but, with more comfortability with Shay Patterson, could be a guy that catches 50 balls. I could see him coming back, but I just don't know, because his athleticism is so off the charts that if the right advisor is in his ear and saying, look, you go just go to the combine. That's all you have to do is go to the combine. You go to the combine, and all of a sudden you're a 2nd-round pick. That might be hard for him to turn down.
Finally, which team do you think is on a higher upset alert? Maybe you think it's neither one, because they're both taking on as you would call them, middling programs, and both that are 5-5 looking for bowl eligibility. For Ohio State, they're on the road at Maryland. Michigan, as we just mentioned, of course, hosting Indiana. Which one do you think is on a higher upset alert, or do you think neither one of them has any trouble?
I think neither one of them have any trouble this week. I think Maryland's in trouble right now. I mean, the way that they've played the last two games, and I know they were close to Indiana, but they got drilled by Michigan State, and then to lose to Indiana, I know on the road, but I just don't think that Maryland's in a good place right now, and I think Ohio State being motivated and ready to go and preparing themselves for Michigan will certainly play their best football next week. And then with Michigan, I'm not seeing it with Indiana. I don't think so. I think the bigger upset this potential week is Nebraska over Michigan State, if I have that correctly. I think that's the one that could sneak up and take down one of the best teams. I say best, I don't know, one of the better
Minnesota's
teams.
going to beat Northwestern.
Okay, maybe. But I think Nebraska, Michigan State's the one that I'm looking for.
Final buy, sell, or hold. This will be the last Jim Harbaugh, Urban Meyer, Michigan, Ohio State game.
Boy, I'm going to sell, or I'm going to buy on that one. I mean, I think Urban Meyer, if he loses to Michigan, I think he steps down. I think he just cites the injury thing and kind of walks away from it. I think Ohio State would be happy to deal with all the stuff that's gone on, all the extracurriculars. I think this could be the last. And you know what? If he might see the writing on the wall too and say, "Hey, I've got to get out of here before Harbaugh starts, cleaning my clock." Not that he's going to clean his clock, but he starts tilting the rivalry in his favor. So I think this is a sell or to buy. I don't know which one you said, but whatever one means that this is the last one, that's the last one.
Michael Spath, WTK in Ann Arbor, Wolverine Digest. Good to see you, brother. We'll do it again next week. Go Blue.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Take care. All right, back here on Michigan Podcast. Based on how I think this season's going to end, this is what I believe the postseason picture will be for the Big Ten. I do believe Michigan will win out from here and be in the college football playoff, likely in the Cotton Bowl against Alabama, but I don't think that's as much of a lock as people think. I could see a scenario where Michigan would move past Notre Dame because they have that 13th data point with a major conference championship. That sends the next best Big Ten team to the Rose Bowl. That would be Ohio State, which is hardly a terrible consolation prize. And then, the last few years, we had 3 or 4 teams in the New Year's Six. I think this year we're only going to have 2. Penn State, I think, finishes out winning out 9-3, goes to the Citrus Bowl. Michigan State at 7-5 to the Outback Bowl. Iowa at 8-4 to the Holiday Bowl. Wisconsin, I think, loses one more game. They go to the Tax Slayer Bowl. Purdue, I think, splits down the stretch here wins their final 2 games to get to the Pinstripe Bowl. Although I did this before the Louisville news came out, and so I could see that being a major distraction for Purdue here down the stretch, as long as Jeff Brom lets that speculation swirl without shutting it down. Northwestern, I think, will lose, as I said to Michael Spath earlier. I think they're going to lose at Minnesota, and I think that gets Minnesota to 6-6, which is a really good season for them, given the way it looked about a month ago. And then I think Northwestern loses to either Michigan or Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game and heads from there out to the San Francisco Bowl. So that's our latest projections of how we believe the postseason picture will look in the Big Ten. Our Twitter poll question this week, we asked you, as a Michigan fan, would you rather win the Big Ten with 2 losses and then win the Rose Bowl, or meaning that you'd be left out of the playoff, or win the Big Ten with 1 loss and lose decisively to Alabama in the college football playoff? And this was more me wondering how much of the new paradigm is set in. Well, with our Twitter following, pretty overwhelmingly, 81% of you said, I'd rather win the Big Ten with 1 loss, even if that means we get Spartied like Alabama did them in the college football playoff a couple of years ago. 19% of you said you'd rather win the Big Ten with 2 losses and go out and win the Rose Bowl. As one smart aleck said to me, Steve, you're basically asking your Twitter followers how many of you are under the age of 50. And yes, if you're that age, then you have the Rose Bowl probably in higher regard than our younger viewers, who obviously would put the college football playoff in a more prominent position. And coming right off of that is our question of the week from Tony Stedry, who says, personally, I think your question is stupid. I would never want to lose any game decisively. Well, of course, I didn't ask you if you wanted to. I'm just saying if that were to happen. And he says, but this part I had a problem with. He says, having 2 losses means we shouldn't be in the Rose Bowl. Are we sure about that? 1969, 1980, 1982, 2003, 2004. Those are all Michigan teams, just off the top of my head, that I'm thinking of right now, that ended up going to the Rose Bowl, and they had 2 regular season losses. 1988, by the way, the 1969 team Bo's first, pulled that massive historic upset against Ohio State. That 1980 team might have been Bo's best team. Finished number 4 in the country, started 1-2, and then won their next 8 in a row. 1982, that was Anthony Carter's last year. They went to the Rose Bowl that year. 1988, they started 0-2. Those last second losses to Notre Dame and Miami to open the year, and those two teams finished 1-2 in the country. And then they went on, upset USC in the Rose Bowl, finished number 4 in the country. 2003, that was our last outright Big Ten championship. 2004, that was our last share of a Big Ten championship. I mean, those are some of the great Michigan teams that we remember fondly of the most recent era here, and they all had 2 losses. So, I don't know, Tony, I think you might want to reconsider that position. Want to thank our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping to get the word out about what we do here at Michigan Podcast each week. Don't forget, you can follow our analysis all week long, 2 places, WolverineDigest.com. That's WolverineDigest.com, and on Twitter at Michigan Podcast, all one word, at Michigan Podcast. If you have time today, please give us a like on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, do the same on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play. And if you have time to leave us one of those 5-star reviews for the podcast version, we would appreciate that as well. It's the last time we're going to watch our beloved Michigan Wolverines come out of the tunnel to the victors at the Big House until August 31st of next year. So enjoy it. Michigan against Indiana before the game. Until next week, go Blue.